Hello and good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Business of Property. I'm your host, Cheryl Leong from Property Development Australia. I begin acknowledging our traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today and pay my respects to elders past and present. And I extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here today. At the Business of Property, we interview superstar guests in the property development space that share their expertise, their deals, and their stories to help empower, build, and grow our community of property developers. So I'd like to say hello to everyone that's joining us today. I know people are trickling in from all sorts of places, Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube as well. If you're here, I'd love for you to drop a comment and say hello. I'm thoroughly excited. I know a lot of people have been reaching out to me as well to have our guest, who is a veteran in the property development space, Bob Anderson. If you haven't heard of Bob Anderson and you're in property development, today you will find out why you need to keep track of what this young gentleman, has been doing for the past almost 40 years in the development space. So Bob has been involved in more than $1.3 billion worth of projects in his development lifespan. He's developed through a whole lot of different ranges of interest from 2%, to 23%, and through employment, which is, yo-yoed as well and across every state except Northern Territory. And so you can imagine how many market cycles he's experienced. And the reason why um, I asked him to join us was because we're going through some uncertain times today. And I'd love for him to share his thoughts and his experience going through the last 4 decades of property. So without further ado, I would love to invite Bob Anderson to the Business of Property dance floor. Hello, Bob.
Hello. Thanks, Cheryl.
Hello. Hello. I know we have a lot of people who are very interested and very excited to have you here this evening. Thank you so much for making the time.
Thoroughly enjoyable.
Excellent.
Love talking about property development.
I know anything to do with property. You just have to start off with one word, and you have much to share along the way. Bob, just give us a little bit of background for those of us that don't know you very well. When did you start your property journey?
Well, as you'd expect, nearly 40 years. So I was in nappies when I started, and all those years ago in the very early 80s. And it's quite embarrassing.
Lego. That's Lego. Lego. When you were building Lego, that's when your property empire started.
Yeah, it's quite embarrassing going to a development site with a packet of Huggies in the back seat, but there I was, so young.
That's
But
the insulation. That's insulation.
yeah, you need it at the moment. I was talking to some people in Canberra today. But yeah, back in those days, I cut my teeth very early in the piece on small land subdivisions. And my first 2 projects, I actually did what I call creative strategies. I actually did them with no money on my own. I stumbled through and I had some help, but that was fun. And
But where did
sometime
you,
later,
Bob, if you don't mind me asking, where did you learn about property development from?
well, back in those days, there was no education
Mm.
virtually. I mean, there was no property development courses. The closest thing you could do was actually valuation, which is a long way from property development. And often they're our enemies. So not really, because I love valuers. But yeah, I cut my teeth for a little while in real estate. I knew I wanted to get into property development, but I had to go the long way round, and at least I wanted to get into property. So I knocked on some doors, and I got a job with a real estate agency that was marketing land subdivisions. That was the main thing they did. They had four subdivisions they were marketing for developers, and so that's how I started selling land to people, selling land to builders, and then builders would build houses, and then I'd sell the houses, and also got to meet the developers of those 4 developments and chew their ear off, and also got to talk to people like the town planners and civil engineers, surveyors, those sorts of people that are involved in the estates that I was selling, and did a bit of reverse engineering as best I could, and eventually the opportunity arose where I was able to have a crack at a 4-lot subdivision. That was my first one. And I used a technique, a vendor finance technique actually to do that. And the weird thing is I didn't know what I was doing. It was the landowner who actually showed me what to do. And he was quite an experienced individual himself in the property world, and took pity on me, I think, because I was 10 foot tall and bulletproof. And I think he was scared I was going to do a lot of crazy stuff. So he actually guided me through. I bought a property off him, would you believe? And he guided me through it. And that was a vendor finance deal where he took me to his bank, helped me get the finance, and I paid him half the money up front and the other half at the other end after I'd sold the property, plus an interest rate. And he guided me through that and held my hand. That was my first project.
So he was your first mentor.
He was, in a way, yes, he was, for that project, and that got me all excited. And the next one I did was what we typically call a joint venture with an equity partner, a money partner, and I did that with my sister's boyfriend at the time, Keith, who was an earth mover, who had plenty of money, and he'd seen me do really well out of this little project, and I was acting quite cocky, telling him about all the money I made and hadn't spent any, and he said, well, look, I've got some money, can you find something, we'll do it together, and we did. And so now I'm 2 projects in, haven't put 5 cents down yet, and starting to build up some capital, and that's how it all started. And a little bit later in the piece, I wanted to get involved in larger projects, so I moved sideways, and I got involved in property development companies, and I held national. I was the Queensland Commercial Development Manager at Hooker Projects. They were the biggest development company in Australia in the day, back in the late 80s, and I was developing commercial office blocks and things in the city with them. And then I moved to the Pioneer Property Group a little bit later, and they were the second biggest residential developer in Australia. I was a national acquisitions manager, and I got involved in a lot of retirement villages. And to this day, that is my favourite development. And,
right.
I'm doing one at the moment and looking at a couple more, but yeah, that's my passion. My favourite type of project, I guess you could say. Got sick of the corporate world eventually in boardrooms, and went back out on my own again, probably 23 years ago. Left the corporate world and haven't been back, and don't miss it.
Been doing that. And when did you start educating others and went mentoring?
Yeah, well, I did a bit in the late 80s actually, because I was building up an investor database to do syndicates with, and I thought one of the best ways to get investors was to educate them initially, and so I did some early teaching them, but I didn't get really serious about it until about 2009, coming out of the GFC, and so I wrote a book in 2006 about property development and how to do it, because I couldn't find a book that really told you how to do it. I found a couple that weren't all that accurate, really, because they weren't written by developers, they were written by consultants. But I got serious and built a course in 2009, and probably 2010 I started mentoring people, because people had just asked me, they do my course and they'd say, "A great course, but can we get more? I mean, can we get access to you? Can you help us? Can you hold our hand? Can you make sure we don't buy a lemon?" And it was sort of based off that I created a mentoring program, which I do to this day, guiding people through, particularly beginners. I mean, just because I've done big projects. I mean, most of the people I work with are beginners, or maybe their second, third project, and I'm working on them with splitters and 2 and 3 lot subdivisions, 4 packs. Not many of them initially tackle an apartment block. Probably talk them out of that. Yeah, so mixture of corporate world and back into the real world again.
And a mixture of different size and types of developments as well. So residential. Have you done sort of commercial and industrial as well? Or?
Yeah, I have. I've developed in every state except the Northern Territory. And in the residential world, land subdivisions, I've done many of those. I love land subdivisions, but also townhouses, apartment blocks, commercial office blocks, retail, shopping centres, and industrial, and specialised stuff like specialised student accommodation, NDIS, which we're doing some of at the moment, and retirement villages would be my favourite one of all. Yeah, so a diversity of types of development. Yeah,
Mm.
keeps
So
life interesting.
definitely keeps life interesting. And over, the main thing I know that a lot of people want to find out, particularly, I've had a few people reach out to me say, Cheryl, I'm not sure what's happening with the market. I'm really quite stressed. I'm really quite anxious. I bet you've got a few conversations with that. You've been through quite a few market cycles.
Lots of
Um,
markets. Yeah.
and the GFC and all of that. What I guess the question that the people have at the moment is where do you think the market's going? From your experience, what are you thinking that the market's going to do over the next year to 5 years?
Well,
I know you don't have a crystal ball.
it is crystal balling. What I found over the years is to stick to the fundamentals, the economic and market cycle fundamentals. So not read too many newspapers, particularly if they're written by journalists who have very little longevity in the property market. And since news is sensational, bad news sells, good news doesn't sell. So be careful. Be careful who you take notice of. Basically, I totally disregard anything in a newspaper and anything on the television, pretty much. Look at the fundamentals, the market fundamentals. Find a couple of people, perhaps commentators, economists ideally, not just commentators, who tend to get it right, who do work with the fundamentals. I don't listen to bank economists too much because they have a very, shall we say, an agenda for running certain things. So somebody independent, somebody who's been around a long time, somebody with a bit of accuracy. I'll throw a name out there, Dr. Andrew Wilson. I quite like Andrew. But I think he's been around a long time. He's very pragmatic. He looks at the fundamentals. He doesn't get into the noise. So he's pretty good. I mean, bigger macro stuff. There's a few people I listen to, but I think the thing is, people don't like change. It's human nature. We don't like change, and we'd love interest rates to settle at the bottom where they've been and continue that way, and for the market to bounce along. As far as markets go, I don't really enjoy big jumps in values in markets. I mean, in a perfect world, I'd love markets to grow by about 3% a year, inflation to run about 1%, interest rates to be anything from 3 to 5%, and just stay that way and never change. But the bottom line is it doesn't work like that. And so we've finally got some interest rate rises, and that does spook people. It doesn't make that big a difference at the moment. I was looking at a 4 townhouse project today that we did a feasibility on a few months ago. And obviously in the last couple of months, we've had a 0.75% base rate, and the cash rate. So, I mean, if that transferred to a 0.75% rise for development finance, I had a look at that 4-pack, and the townhouses are worth $925,000 each on completion, just to give you a bit of scope on it. And the 0.75% interest rate rise that we've had adds $5,500 per townhouse to the cost. So $5,500 worth of extra cost in the form of interest to that, which really makes very little difference. And if you would equate that to sale prices, it's 0.6% of the sale price. In other words, if the market rose just 0.6 of 1%, it would wipe out that interest rate rise. So it's not so much the quantum of it, it's the psychological effect when interest rates start to climb. And it has a psychological effect of putting the brakes on, because a lot of people automatically get scared, they put the brakes on. The bottom line is, people that have gotten loans in the last 3 or 4 years, they've been qualified, their serviceability has been qualified at a buffer of around 2.5 or 3%. So theoretically, at least, if nothing's changed in their life, it has to go up 2.5 or 3% before they start to feel the heat. People who've gone through a change, perhaps an illness, lost their job, gone from part-time to casual, or perhaps one of the partners has now gone from full-time to casual, and their income's dropped since they got the loan. they'll be squeezed more. And people have had their loans for quite a while. Well, they've probably most of the loans have been principal and interest, so they've probably reduced their loan quite a bit since then. And when they went in, they had a buffer to deal with anyway. So I don't see it as a big thing. But my concern when interest rates go up is the RBA themselves, because they've got a tradition of slamming their feet on the brakes instead of tapping. And I've seen this in the past. I saw it sort of pre-GFC when the market was getting a bit hot, and the RBA thought, well, we've got to take a little bit of heat out of the market. So they used the stick. The only stick they've got is interest rates, and it's a big, heavy stick. It's a sledgehammer to crack a peanut.
Yeah,
it's the only thing they've got. So they put up interest rates, and a month later, nothing had really changed, and they put them up again, and a month later, hardly anything had changed, and they slammed it on at 0.75%, basically within 61 days, and the whole thing slammed to a screaming halt, and everyone went through the windscreen. And the problem with that is when you start playing with interest rates in the property market, it takes a while to filter through. I mean, the actual effects of an interest rate rise can take 3 to 6 months before it filters through into the market. And in their infinite wisdom, I don't know if they understand that or not. I'd say they don't. I hope they've learned, but that's what they've done in the past. Instead of tapping the brake coming up to the stop sign and coming to a nice leisurely stop, they tap it a few times and they slam it, and that creates a lot of drama. So I hope this time, when they're playing with interest rates, to try and dampen inflation a bit. We haven't seen wages growth, which is interesting in my opinion. I mean, to me, that the whole line for years has been, we won't put interest rates up until we see wages growth and an inflation spike. We had the inflation spike. I don't know how permanent it is. And they did it ahead of getting the numbers on wages. So they did their first one, and wages came in at basically no wages growth at all.
That's an interesting point there with wages growth, and currently we're at the lowest level of unemployment, and there's however, and I suspect it's more a delay in the market and its numbers and the figures, because I mean practically you're seeing everyone. There are trades, you talk about trades, and you talk about even, whether it's white collar, blue collar trade, there is so much so that, there is a higher level of demand for employment than there is the supply out there, and people are paying big bucks for it. So particularly, and I know this is a different industry, so I do wonder if it's a matter of timing of that data coming out rather than, I mean, I do think there are wage growth happening, but it's probably not being reported, or the data is not quite out at the moment.
Well,
However, a lot of people have been spending a lot of money.
Yeah.
over the last.
The latest figures take us up to the 31st of March. So it is recent, and you have to wonder about wages growth, because if you look at the trades industry, tradies have never made this much money in their life. They almost name their own price. So they've certainly had an increase in their wages in the last couple of years, enormously. So if overall there's been little wages growth, it suggests to me that if you're not a trader, you may have been going backwards. And then how is that calculated? Is it people going from full-time to part-time? I mean, I don't know. And I don't dig too deep on that because ultimately, to me it has to affect property. But it was interesting the way they went. And so I guess back to your question, where's it all heading? Well, they do have to control inflation, and now it remains to be seen how consistent the figures are. The previous month there was a spike. Most of that spike was caused by increase in values in housing and particularly fuel. So the question is, how long is fuel going to be $2 something a litre? And how, it depends on what happens in other countries. Even at the moment, we can't control what's happening in Europe. That's part of it. Also, the fuel companies were caught short with not enough fuel supplies, and they'll be building those up. So yeah, look, just going forward, I think we're moving into a higher inflation environment, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. I've made some of my best money in high inflation, because normally in high inflation you get high growth. So, but this time we've had the high growth, and we've got the high inflation after the growth means things are sort of slowing down, particularly in the two big cities, Sydney and Melbourne. I mean, we've seen so-called negative growth in the last quarter in Sydney and Melbourne, and last month we saw a bit in the ACT. But I mean, without getting too deeply on it, I mean, price growth is really calculated off the mean price of houses that are sold. And so when markets are changing, it doesn't mean the value of property. If Sydney went back 1.4% last month, it doesn't mean that every property in Sydney has now lost $1.4 in value. It may have been 2% at the top end, and the middle may have even gone up, and the bottom might have gone up, but it's averaged minus, you know. So, and when markets start to correct, it's usually the top end of the market that comes down fastest, and it's the top end that goes up first. So it'll sort itself out. The interesting thing to me is that you know, pre-COVID, the biggest driver of growth in Australia was overseas migration, and a bit of interstate migration. That's only state to state, but nationally it was overseas migration, and in other words, population growth. 60% of our population growth was overseas migration, and 40% was organic. And yet, without overseas migration, we've had just the biggest boom we've ever had. And so, but what about overseas migration? It's a bit of a sleeping element. We can't grow as a country. We don't have enough skilled workers, and we're going to have to, you know, open the gates, and it's probably started a little bit. But what about when we really open the gates more, and bringing in more skilled workers from overseas? You know, they'll have capital, and they'll want housing, on top of, you know, we haven't had them for a couple of years. What's that going to do? And a majority of them go to Sydney and the rest to Melbourne, and really there's not many left over for Brisbane and Adelaide and anywhere else. Let's see what happens when that happens. I mean, that's not talked about very much.
Yeah. And so, I guess the question is, for a lot of developers, how do we practically manage this uncertainty and all these, you know? And we talked about this very briefly before we came on. How much of this is psychological and how much of it is actually controllable?
Yeah, well, I think, I mean, interest rates are the big thing at the moment, because obviously it affects us as developers, the cost of money. We don't all, you know, have enough capital to do a development without going to a financier. So, you know, interest is a big expense in a development. And so when it goes up, I just sort of pulled a couple of figures before to show that really that 0.75% made almost no difference to a developer. It will make more of a difference to a long-term investor. They're holding a property for, you know, 10 or 20 years as an investor, then obviously interest rates have a bigger effect. But then we've got almost unprecedented rental growth at the moment as well. I mean, it's just through the roof. Vacancy factors nationally down to 1.8% on average in capital cities, and some of the cities, you know, Adelaide and Brisbane, are 0.5 and 1%. I mean, that's unbelievable. So, but, you know, rental growth always follows housing growth. It always lags. It often lags 6 or 8 months. And even though the capital growth sort of petered out, the rental growth will keep going for a while. That'll lift yields back, you know, to where they used to be. But as far as, you know, developing in tough markets, I think you've got to, like I said before, you've got to be very careful who you listen to. You're moving into a higher interest rate regime. Feasibilities are always critical, but never more so. I think during the last couple of years, a lot of people have been buying sites on low margin, low development margin, and hoping that by the time they eventually get their development permit and the building permit, and they front up the bank to get their construction finance, that the increase in sale prices has actually lifted the value of the site up to a point where they might be, say they're chasing a 17% margin, they're buying at 12%, and they're hoping that, you know, increase in values during that 9, 10, 11, 12 months before you need construction finance is going to lift it from 12 to 17, and I'll tick the box and I'll get the money. In some places, particularly Sydney and Melbourne, that's so long. So for a start, I wouldn't be buying low margin developments, particularly in those two markets at the moment. People can't help themselves; they will. But you know, there's a risk involved if the market flattens and you buy a 12% deal and you rock up to the bank with a 12% deal 12 months later. commercial finance, you're not going to get it.
Mm.
And so if it's a little project, it's just financing on retail finance, a little duplex, and you've got enough serviceability to fund it through a bank, it won't matter that much because they don't look at the margin on cost retail banks. It's only commercial. So yeah, I'll be watching the feasibilities pretty carefully, particularly in the two big cities. But it's quite different from the past, where we've had high inflation often drives prices up. This time we've got a slow reverse where we've had the jump, and then we've got the inflation a bit later. But really the effect of the inflation at the moment is mainly on interest rates, and so I mean they're quite containable. We can easily cope with a couple of percent really. More.
Just have to factor it into the costs,
Yeah, at the end of the day, it's a cost. Yeah. My third project, I paid 23% interest, and that was before the deregulation of the banking industry, which I think was about 1987 or so. Where we just had credit squeezes. Money just dried up. Australia isn't a big enough economy to get by on its own capital, and it has to bring capital in from overseas. And at that point, it just dried up, and you couldn't get a loan anywhere. And I managed to score a loan through a company called Finance Corporation of Australia. 23% was the offer, and I grabbed it. Now, the reason I did it is I fed that 23% interest rate into my feasibility, and it still worked. And so I can remember I went out, and I was quite young then, just out of nappies at that point. And I went out and had a party that night with some friends because I got a loan, and nobody else was getting money. And so,
a loan party.
A loan party, yeah. The 23% loan, you go and throw a party. I mean, what's wrong? But the thing is, you can get into trouble if you do property development wrong. You get into trouble at a 2% interest rate. You don't need a 20% interest rate to get into trouble. I mean, you got to do things right, do all the fundamentals of good property development, no matter what the interest rate is. But we'll wait and see. If there is, I think some of the other cities have still got a bit of growth left in them, or be subdued growth. And we'll see what happens to Sydney and Melbourne. I mean, I've heard all sorts of figures about Sydney and Melbourne dropping 15% and all that sort of stuff, but it's often the same people that said it's going to drop 20 and 30 during COVID as well. But it's flattened out. It's almost neutral. I mean, it's gone back, 1.4%, 0.8% in Melbourne over the quarter, but you can't look at it monthly. It's too short a time frame. I mean, you look at last month. Well, we had a federal election. That always slows things up. The war in the Ukraine was still on, affecting a few things, even psychological for some people. We had the interest rate. We had the talk about inflation. I mean, all that was in a 1 month period. So you can't sort of judge a market direction from 1 month. Even 3 months is pretty short, but at least it's getting better. And so, look, if I see very modest falls in capital growth in Sydney and Melbourne. The issue at the moment is that there's a lot of stock on the market in Sydney and Melbourne. Every other city in Australia is running at record low stock, compared to the 5-year average. In Sydney and Melbourne are running over. So the point is that some of that stock will be pulled off the market because people can't get the price they wanted to get, and they'll pull it off. As well, and that could be a good thing as well. And some of that stock will get taken up, and so I don't see a big jump like they're talking about in those cities. And I also want to see if there is a plus on the horizon. It's the elephant in the room with overseas migration, which 85% of that's going to go to those two cities, and that's a longer term thing. But I think increased interest rates, we're going to have to live with them for a while.
And you've just got, again, factor it into your feasibilities, whether it's increased interest rates, whether it's an increase in build prices, and it just run it through the feasibility. We've got a few questions popping up here, Bob. Everyone's starting to warm up. How much do you think the homes lost to fire and flood have impacted the demand? And was this one of the drivers of increased prices? I'm assuming in Queensland.
The fire and the floods. I don't think the floods did a lot. The last time we had some big floods, and they were bigger than the last ones in Queensland, was 2011 and 2013. The flood we had in Brisbane was a bit smaller than those floods. and the market actually did go a bit backwards. I had about 5 projects on the go during the 2011 floods, and property values dropped about 5%. But that wasn't just a flood; there was a big cyclone at the same time, which knocked out North Queensland. When a market drops 5% in a property development, well, all it really means, instead of making $100,000, out of that, out of a particular apartment, you might end up making whatever it is, $65,000 or $70,000. We've always got that big buffer of it called our profit in there. So yeah, I made less profit than I thought during that period, but I still made a good profit.
It goes back to what you mentioned, Bob. Sorry for interrupting. It's making sure you've got enough of a margin, right? And it's the reason why in development, it's when people are talking about feasibilities, 20-30% profit margin, because at the end of the day, there are few that actually hit that mark because there's so many variables. It's to take into account all that sort of risk that you're having to manage through that development process.
Yeah, exactly. And to me, 40 years in the industry, I've seen a lot of people do well, and I've seen some not do so well. And then people that don't do well, over the years, I've tried to have a look at maybe where they all went wrong. And by far, the vast majority of people went wrong with their feasibilities. They just really didn't know how to do good, accurate feasibility. And they've gone in there and thought they had a deal that stacked up. And often they won't know until down the track. You buy an old house to do a 4-pack. All you're doing is buying an investment property. You've done your feasibility, it looks good, but it was wrong. And so, 9 or 10 months later, when you got your development permit, you rock up to the bank to get the construction finance, and they say, well, go and talk to the valuer. And the valuer does a proper feasibility. You find out you were wrong, and your 20% is really 12, and you don't get the money. And that's, people don't know that sometimes until 9 or 12 months into the deal. And so the thing is, that's what I've seen most people new to property development. The problem is getting the numbers right at the beginning. It's not choosing the wrong architect. That's not the main reason things go wrong. It's not the wrong consultant. It's not that the architect charged too much or the engineer charged too much. It's their numbers were never right in the first place. And so, yeah, look, you keep saying it and I keep nodding. Got to get your feasibility right. Don't go in on a low margin. Interest rates themselves don't have a big impact on a development, but the psychological impact, even from purchasers, even people buying. I mean, as a developer, most of the time we sell. Sometimes we keep stuff, but most of the time we sell. So we're really looking at purchasers at the other end. And so whether they're owner-occupiers or investors, they're the people that, in a lot of cases, are borrowing the money. And but the good thing is that unemployment's so low, heading towards 4%. I've seen some tough times like 1991 when we had the recession we had to have, Mr. Keating's recession, telling us we had to have it, so don't blame me. And that was a serious recession. It wasn't like the toy one we had at the end of the toy, almost technical recession we had at the end of COVID. That was a serious recession. And unemployment was 11.4%. When unemployment's so high, people don't want to spend money because they don't want to take out a loan because they could be out of work next week. That pressure's not there at the moment. I mean, they just got to cope with a few percentage points more. Everywhere I walk, I see signs in windows. Somebody wanted, experience not necessary. You see it everywhere. Shortage of staff. And so that's quite different. The labour market's very strong.
Yeah, absolutely.
People aren't scared of losing their jobs, so they will. We've got record savings. It's starting to filter out a bit. People aren't quite saving as much now as they maybe were in the past years. But people have saved a lot of money. They've paid off credit cards. And that's the sort of stuff that hurts. That short term, it'll kill your serviceability. A lot of that's gone now. So borrowers are generally in a fairly good state, other than those who may have gone through a bit of bad luck or illness or lost their job or something. So
but most of them got their jobs back or some sort of employment, and that's why the comment about the wage growth, it surprises me that hasn't been reflected in the data as yet, because I suspect that it
Yeah.
will
I
probably
think
in
we'll
this
see.
quarter.
I think we'll see it.
Yeah.
And that in itself does fuel wages growth, sort of fuels inflation a bit, but it also means people are going to spend more. Generally speaking. Not that I suggest you get a $50 pay rise and you go and spend $100 because you're so excited, but
Loan
yeah,
party.
that's the way I see it. I mean, I see relatively high unemployment, employment, I should say, going forward, which keeps things solid there. Interest rate, we'll probably get a couple of more interest rate rises. It doesn't kill a good project at all. It may affect a little bit sales on the back end in terms of mainly psychological, really, but people will get used to it.
Yeah.
I mean, I just can't believe somebody who's borrowed money at 23%. I worked out recently that during my property development career, I've gone through 64 interest rate changes, some up and some down.
Oh my goodness.
But I kept going, even at 23%, I made money because I bought well and feasibility worked out. And there wasn't much competition because no one was getting money. And so actually I was in a pretty good position, even with a crazy interest rate,
And I mean, and this is a point when you've got that mindset where it's about, okay, well, it's just the cost of the transaction if it works, and the fact that it's actually putting you in a position where there's not as much competition. I mean, this is the same with anything that you're doing, looking around, going, there are markets within markets.
Yep.
And even if Sydney or Melbourne sort of overall as a city or state drops, it doesn't necessarily reflect that exact suburb or that exact street.
There could be 30 markets in Sydney, geographical, socioeconomic, economic. I can remember at basically towards the back end of the GFC, but still during the GFC 2009, in Victoria, some of the Bayside suburbs, Brighton, Sandringham, and they went up 15%, and we're still in the GFC. I mean, as a developer, you can look at what's happening in Australia, you can look at what's happening in the state, you can have a look at what's happening in your city, but at the end of the day, it's down to suburban level, and in some cases even street level. I mean, even within a suburb, you can have areas that are better than others. Some might be in a school zone that's really popular. Some might be on the top of a hill with a view, close to transport. I mean, there's all these variables even within the suburb. So, you got to, and that's the level you really got to bring your market intelligence down to as a developer.
Yeah. Let's get through some of these questions here, Bob. You've got a bit of a fan base here. Ravi's asked, how can we forecast the demand and supply of housing at a suburb level? Probably looking at some tools and data.
Yeah. Well, down to a suburb level, I mean, it's not all that hard to look at a suburb and have a look at, well, one is how long stock taking to sell. Obviously, if it's taking longer and longer to sell stock, then that market is probably softening a bit. But when is something in equilibrium in a suburb? I mean, you can have one suburb that's absorbing 30 townhouses a month and another one that's absorbing 10. And so, if you build 30 townhouses a month go into the suburb that absorbs 30, that's equilibrium. But if 20 go into a suburb that only absorbs 10, then it's not, and that market will soften. So you can have a look today. And let's say you had a look at a market today, you've had a look at a lot of sales, you grab the data you talk to every real estate agent that sells new projects in there, and you've decided that there's a bit of an oversupply of townhouses in that suburb. And so the obvious thing to do, most people will say, well, there's an oversupply of townhouses, so I'm either going to build something else or I won't build there and I'll go somewhere else. The reality is, though, that it's probably 2 years before your townhouse project is finished. By the time you get the site, get all your approvals, get your finance, get it built, particularly at the moment, it's taken like forever to get something built, and get it to the market, assuming you're not doing pre-sales, it's 2 years' time. And it's quite possible that in that 2 years' time, the market's completely swung around and there's a shortage of townhouses. Because when there is an oversupply, people pull back, people stop buying sites, people don't get development permits, and you have that period of time where those products are absorbed. And then you can go into an undersupply. So you can't just look at what a market's doing today and say, well, it's going to be exactly that in 2 years' time. You can track things along the way. You can talk to various consultants. I mean, if you talk to town planners, they have a pretty good idea of areas where there's lots of development applications in. So if there's lots of development applications going into a particular suburb at the moment, then you're going to see a lot of construction start in probably 9 to 12 months, and you're probably going to see a lot of finished stock in 18 to 24 months as that filters through. So you can pick up projections in the market at that early DA stage, and you can track. A lot of councils have data that you can check on the amount of development approvals going through and all that sort of stuff. You can go a bit further down the track, and obviously, once building starting, it's pretty obvious the fence goes up and the building starts. But even talking to people like valuers, so valuers obviously are doing valuations for finance. So people are chasing finance normally just after they got development permit, sort of moving on maybe to the building permit construction certificate if you're in New South Wales. But around that stage, starting to talk to the banks about construction finance. It might be a few months away, but they're starting to get geared up. And so pretty soon the bank's asking valuers to do the valuation. So, if you're in with some valuers and they might say, look, I'm doing a lot of valuations at the moment at this particular suburb, that means we're getting close to construction, and that's pre-construction. And then, of course, when the fences go up, it is construction. And so, if you get into the marketplace, if you mix in the right circles, if you go to the right sort of, whether you become a member of the UDIA or whatever, and you get to meet these sorts of people, town planners and valuers and the like, quantity surveyors to do with construction, you can see a lot of stuff before it actually appears on the ground. And that can give you a bit of an understanding as well.
And that's why it's important to be able to build a network and your contacts and consistently having the conversations about property and what's happening in the market.
Absolutely, yeah.
5-hour networking sessions, Bob.
5 hours. Well, that's when the best networking's done, is after the event. We all know that.
Yeah. And add a few drinks and everyone talks the truth. Bob,
that's when I bring out my stories. I've got some great stories.
I'm sure you do. We've got another question here about rooming houses. Have you done rooming houses, and what are your thoughts about them?
Yeah, I have done rooming houses. In which
states, Bob?
Where?
Yeah.
Queensland, actually. Rooming houses. Rooming house isn't necessarily a modern boarding house, because a boarding house is still a boarding house, which is different from a rooming house, but it's developed as a boarding house. But rooming houses, in my part of the world, they did get quite common. It's a little bit harder to make them stack up. But typically, like if you're in somewhere like Brisbane, and I can't say what it's like in every city, but you can rent to 5 unrelated people in a house. And so you could have a house with 5 bedrooms and rent to 5 separate people. And a lot of rooming houses that I've seen are being built like that. And what a lot of people are doing is like buying an 800 square metre lot, which is either a splitter lot or a 2-lot subby, splitting it and building 2 5-bedroom houses and treating those as rooming houses. Rent by room, of course, is going to be a lot more than rent to one family. The management's a lot more intense. My experience is I actually probably haven't done a decent size one probably since about 2014. But what I did, that rule that I just mentioned back in those days only related to the bottom zoning, the bottom residential zoning. It didn't relate to the zoning where you do townhouses. And so I did some 9-bedroom townhouses near the university. I did 9-bedroom townhouses, and each bedroom had a bathroom. And like the rental on those things is pretty astronomical. Even back in 2014, they rented for $300 a room. So basically, you get $2,700 out of a townhouse. 1,200 metre site did 4 townhouses, and so that was $10,000 a week rent, even back in those days.
Yeah, that's incredible. Did you have all 4? Did you have all 4 as 9-bedroom?
Each of them is 9 bedrooms. Yeah.
Wow, that's incredible.
And we got away from that because everybody was thinking, 5 unrelated people, but they didn't realise that rule only related to the bottom level of zoning. That's probably all changed since then, because I know councils have come down a bit hard on some places, and it's treated differently in every state, rooming houses as well. But to answer your question, I have done them. What I particularly love as a developer is I like to develop stock and keep some. And the stuff I like to keep is stuff that produces a good cash flow.
Yeah.
And if it happens to be a rooming house, I mean, we're involved with some a builder friend of ours in joint ventures, or mainly Hillary, really my partner. It's mainly her, but doing NDIS projects, and we keep those, of course, because of the rental return on them. And it's not way ahead of rooming houses. But there's a lot of things that can go wrong if you really don't know what you're doing with that.
Yeah.
And my favourite one, retirement villages. I mean, obviously not everyone can do one, but when you do a retirement village, you keep it. You never sell them.
Yeah, absolutely. Rooming houses versus commercial property, because often people look at commercial and they're like good yields, rooming also good yields, but you've got a lot more sort of property management.
Yeah, you have. I mean, it's a different market. I mean, I've done commercial and residential retail development. Success in commercial is all about getting a tenant early, or getting an end user early. Either way, I mean, whether you get a tenant early, you will get an end user, because there's lots of people who want to buy a commercial property with a tenant in place. There's lots of self-managed super funds and different people that will do it. Where you get hurt with commercial or retail is if you build it, you can't get the tenant for a while. It's a lot easier to get a residential tenant. Much easier to get a residential tenant. I mean, I know rentals at a ridiculously low rate at the moment, but the long-term average is probably, for new product, is probably around 2.25% nationally. And you might have a vacancy factor of 3% in the city, but that's a mixture of some pretty ugly stuff that doesn't rent well and some brand new stuff. And if it's averaging 3%, the new stuff will be 2%. And so always low vacancy factors generally on new residential product. You'll always get a tenant. Even if you can't sell it, you get a tenant. And if the interest rates aren't too bad, you'll go close to covering your debt. It's not so. It's a different level of risk and a different thing in commercial as well. I've seen people build commercial, maybe not do it right, maybe not the right place, not get a tenant, and they just hemorrhage. So very important. That's why if you can get a head tenant or a pre-lease on commercial, they're a bigger margin on the development side. It's nothing unusual. Small industrial developments get 30%, 35% margin. If you can get a tenant in quickly. If you've got a tenant, you'll always sell it. But then if you've got a tenant, why not keep it? Because of the yield. Residential, as you say, rooming houses, they're management intense. But, if a tenant leaves, if you've got a 5-bedroom, you've still got 4 bedrooms rented.
More to go. Yep.
Worst case scenario, you probably only ever lose one at a time, and you can fill them.
So you're diversifying your risk there.
I think so.
Yeah. Next question. Build cost increase versus price increase. Is it all relative? That's an interesting.
Well, it's not directly proportional to each other.
Yeah.
I mean, during 2020, a little bit of 2021, we saw price growth outstrip build cost increases. And a lot of people are lucky, because a lot of people had bought bad sites and were, going to lead to, hemorrhage a bit. But then when the market kicked on so much, it suddenly made a bad deal work.
Yeah.
And so a lot of people with dud deals actually got out of it. And that's good. I mean, you've got to have luck. I love luck. You get a bit of luck. As long as they don't think that they're clever and realise that they're actually saved, and you can't make a career out of that sort of stuff, being saved every time you do something stupid. But good luck to you. But then it's sort of a bit of the growth sort of petered out. Build costs they're going up. They're not going at the rate they were. A lot of builders have sort of gotten used to the supply issues as well, which is why build times have gone out. I was talking to a builder the other day. I mean, a number of our students, even in our mentoring program, it's probably 5 or so are doing duplexes at the moment. And a typical time to build a duplex is 9 months.
Yes.
And so builders are taking longer just to build a duplex. It's amazing. But they've sort of come to work it out. So when they sign a building contract, they order their timber immediately, because they know they won't need the timber till month 3, and it'll be there when they need it. Same with steel. Things that are in short supply, they'll book tradies in. And as builders said, well, look, things haven't changed greatly, but then they've learned to manage it a lot better.
They've had to just change their processes to suit the market, really.
Yeah. But if you're talking about the difference between a price increase and let's say the sale price increase, like on a typical townhouse, like middle of the market townhouse, the build cost is about 40% of your total development cost. Or if you look at it the other way, it's probably about 35% of your sale price. So if a build price went up 3%, you only need a 1% increase in your sale price to actually wipe out that 3% build cost. And that's what you have to think. You know, so in respect, if you're just talking percentages, the price increase smashes the build cost 3 to 1. But if build costs keep going up and price is static, then that's it. And it comes back to the type of contracts that you do, the kind of contracts you negotiate. You know, whether there's a rise and fall clause or an escalation clause in there, or if there's not, or, you know, everyone wants to get a lump sum fixed price and time contract with no escalation clause, but, you know, a lot of builders are trying to, you know, get one in, and so it's, you know, it's back to negotiations, back to price, back to using the right builder. But it's mainly build times that are blown out. I mean, 9 months for a duplex is staggers me, but that's what it is at the moment. Pre all this problem, we were doing 5-story buildings in 9 months. Now you get a duplex built in 9 months. So, all right, work that out. But it is what it is.
Yeah, we've got a duplex build and it says 12 months. I about cried.
Well, I was told by a builder today, we were looking at some pricing, and he said, "Look, I'll price it, but I need a 14-month contract." So we said, "Oh, thanks anyway, but no thanks."
Well, that's covering their behinds, right? I mean, particularly if you've got liquidated damages applied to it as well. Rather tell you it's going to take 14 months and take 12 months rather than be slapped with liquidated damages.
It's not that it takes 9 months to build a duplex, because they mightn't even start till month 3. I mean, you probably see it where you are. A fence goes up, the builder's sign goes up, and, you know, you drive past the next day to see if they're
You're waiting.
And 3 months later, they haven't done anything. But they're sort of organising everything in the background, and out of that 9 months, they might build it in 5. You know, they might start for 3 months, and there you go. But anyway, look, the thing is, you factor that into your feasibility. Like you said earlier, Cheryl, just do the feasibility right. You know, allow 9 months, put it in the feasibility, see how it comes out. All it does is add a little bit to your interest cost. But back to the question anyway about sale prices knocking out build costs, it's 3 to 1, so you don't need much.
I think when you because when you put it that way, Bob, because you've been through it, and it's we talked about this a little bit, the psychology of it. If it's, you know, you look at it and go, okay, well, I'm not going to just focus on interest rates. I'm going to look at what else is happening in my project as a whole. What else is happening in the market? Am I, you know, is it really affecting the project as much as I thought? Am I focusing too much on something that's really not such a huge problem overall?
Well, that's the temptation, and that's why I said don't read newspapers and don't watch television about property, and definitely don't watch The Block and think that that's how renovations work. They make an enormous loss. Nobody makes a profit there. The producers lose millions and millions of dollars. So, yeah, I mean, you're right. Don't a lot of noise out there.
Yes.
Like I said, just focus on the fundamentals, and you'll be okay.
Do your numbers. I'm going to read out one more question here from the dance floor. Do you think baby boomers' super and cash reserves will nullify the RBA big stick approach and create a two-tiered economy? So we're talking about self-managed super and all that buying up.
But baby boomers aren't as wealthy as a lot of people think. The average baby boomer is not wealthy. If we start with their super, a lot of baby boomers never will either, you know, it was at the end of their working career, or they never even got so-called compulsory super. And there's a lot of jobs. I mean, I'm a baby boomer. Well, not really. Baby boomers went for 20 years or something. I don't know how long they went. I think they went from 1946 to 1962 or 3 or something. Anyway, whatever it was. And a lot of those people, their whole working life, they had very little super. They might have got a bit of super in the last 10 years of their life. So a lot of them don't really have a lot of super, baby boomers. And often they're not as wealthy as people might think, although they're, like in any age cohort, there's wealthy people and not wealthy people. like if you think, I'll sort of get around to answering that, but when interest rates go up, everybody concentrates on interest rates going up. But what about all the self-funded retirees that often need interest rates to support them? Because they don't qualify for a pension. They're living off their own means, and when interest rates started to drop, and when they were 8%, they were okay. Then it dropped down at 4%. Well, their income halved at 4%, and it halved again there too. And so, if you think about that, I mean, there's a lot of people that are crying out for interest rate rises. It's not all about interest rates going up, and
that's a different perspective. That's a really different perspective to how to look at the rates as well.
And it's the same with debt. 50% of people have no debt on their home. We could talk about single mums suffering because interest rates go up 1%, and they can only feed the baby once a day or something. But it's very much a minority. I mean, half the houses don't have a mortgage on them. So you tend to get a slanted view of things, but it's where people direct your vision, Yes. And so baby boomers, super and cash reserves nullify the big stick. Well, they do have a big stick. The RBA's only got one stick, and that's called interest rates. And like I said, it's cracking peanuts with a sledgehammer. That's all they've got. Two-tiered economy. Well, in a way, I think what's happened in the last couple of years has probably separated a bit more those that have and those that don't have. I think there's been a bit of a wedge driven in there. The wealthier have probably got a bit wealthier, and the not so wealthy haven't necessarily increased a lot. But I can't think of a better reason to get into a bit of property development. If you're on the bottom half and you want to get to the top half, that's how you do it. You don't get there working at $40 an hour, that's for sure. So I don't know. I don't necessarily agree to nullify the old big stick of the RBA. I just hope the RBA doesn't belt too hard and slam the brakes on. I hope they've learned from their past mistakes.
We shall see over the next few months.
I mean, banks don't make much money in low interest rate regime. They've always wanted the interest rates to be high. They make a lot more profits when the interest rates are higher than when they're hovering around.
They'll pass on the rate rises really quickly, but not pass on the the rate drops.
Well, that's the way. I mean, they're independent. I mean, they're not bound to pass them on or not pass them on. So, and they can put it up as often as they like. They're not locked to the RBA. But at least there's sort of an element of competition between the two. Although I wouldn't be surprised if it's one huge cartel with the big four. I'm sure they all dine together at a common board table and sort things out. And he's going to do this month, and he's doing that. Maybe I'm a bit of a skeptic. I don't know.
We shall see what transpires over the next few months. I know there's a final question about feasibilities and how accurate they are, and I guess that's the point that I want to sort of start to wind this up a bit, because that's very briefly, Bob, you mentioned that you do mentoring. You obviously have you teach people about development. Let's touch on that very briefly, and the session that you have in Sydney on the 18th as well.
Okay, very quickly. Well, I do have a property development course, particularly for people that are getting into property development, and I do have a high-level mentoring program for those that are really serious, really want to take off with a big safety net. If you're going to do your first development and you've got me sitting there with 1.3 billion behind me in 40 years, it'll probably be a safe ride. So, I mean, the best way to find out about my course or anything we do is go to the website, propertymastermind.com.au, have a bit of a walk around that. And if you'd like to know a bit more than what's on the website, give us a call. We're happy to have a chat about it. propertymastermind.com.au, there it is there for any information on courses. But beyond that, we're celebrating. And, we all got locked down for a long time. We couldn't get out and do a lot of live events. And so just recently, I've decided that we're going to get out and just have a good gathering of people, a bit of education thrown in, not selling anything. I won't be there trying to sell a course or anything. And so on the 18th, this Saturday week, the 18th, we'll be in Sydney from 2 p.m. to 5:30. And I've chosen a subject joint ventures, how to do joint ventures, because it's something people love to know.
Mhm.
I've done about $300 million worth of joint ventures and capital raising, so I've got a bit of a clue on what goes on there. So I'll be talking about that. My good mate Tony Lee, our mutual friend,
Yes.
the extraordinary Tony Lee, accountant, he'll be there talking about structures. My partner Hilary will be talking about the other 50% that makes you a successful property developer, and that's what happens up here. And that 6 inches of real estate, that's usually what separates success from non-success. So she'll do a little session. Jo Vadillo from Sydney, good mate of mine, she'll be there and talking about how to find off-market deals. And Aaron, one of our students, is doing a joint venture at the moment. We'll be there talking about his joint venture. So that's the 18th in Sydney. We're also going to do the same thing in Melbourne the following week, and we'll put it up on your Facebook side as well, Cheryl. You'll see it popping up.
Yeah, I've seen that, and I've just added the link to the event in the chat as well. So you'll see that across Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn also. I've got someone said, I attended the Brisbane workshop, was very helpful, super engaging presenters. Excellent. Excellent. So
after the event, don't forget, Cheryl, the important part, it goes from 2 to 5:30. At 5:30, we're going to break up.
It's a 2-to-1 ratio, I hear. It's a
just about, yeah. The Brisbane one went as soon as it was over. We went and did some networking and quenched our thirst, and the networking went on for 5 hours. So we'll be doing the same in Sydney at the end of the event at 5:30. We'll go down and you can have an orange juice, a Coke, or whatever else you like to drink, and talk and mix and just talk property development. It's a celebration of getting out there again. We're not there. You can leave your credit card at home. I don't care. We won't be selling anything.
No one walks out with credit cards these days, Bob. Anyhow,
I'll
be all on their phones.
Yeah, I'll put it up on the site. But I'm also going to Canberra on the 23rd. That's a Thursday night. Slightly different. I'll be doing a session there on investing in property developments as an investor, not so much as a developer.
Yes.
And the right way to do that. I've been asked by some finance people, friends of mine in Canberra, to come down and talk about that. I'll post it where it is. Anybody in the ACT wants to drop along, that'll be on the 23rd, the Thursday. So I've got lots happening this month.
That's another good topic to talk about as well.
Yeah, it is. We've seen some lively debate on the Facebook today.
We certainly have, and I mean that's the whole point of having the community, is to be able to have these open conversations, right? As long as they're respectful as well. I think the whole point is to be able to highlight. We talk about risk. We talk about at the end of the day, development's about risk management and finding solutions. Where your focus goes, your energy flows. Thank you, Cheryl and Bob. Absolutely. Well, Bob, I'd like to say thank you very, very much for sharing your knowledge and a bit of a snippet about your thoughts about where things are at in the current property market. If anyone's keen to obviously have a longer chat to you, and you're in Sydney, June 18th.
Could cost you a beer.
Could cost you a beer. In Sydney, that's expensive. So it's expensive beer, but worth it, obviously. Worth it very much. Thank you, everyone who dropped in and listening to the replay. If you've got questions, thank you for sharing that as well. And for all of you, anyone that's in the Gold Coast, so this is tomorrow. I'm off to the Gold Coast tomorrow. We're having a little bit of a casual meet and greet. Tony Lee will also be there. He's a bit of a he's following us around, Bob.
He's a party animal,
He's a party animal. He's bringing 10 people along. Oh my goodness!
Tony always
I hear State of Origin, so my hopes aren't that high as to how many people will turn up. But we'll be at the Broad Beach Tavern for anyone that wants to drop in. We've got a table of 20. I suspect we're going to have to double that by tomorrow. It's casual dinner and chat and networking, and be good to see people. It's great to be able to get out again, like you said, Bob. And I'll see you on Saturday, 18th as well. Amazing. Thank you, everyone. Take care. You keep well, keep safe, and keep warm. I will see you again, Bob, And thank you everyone for joining us this evening. I hope you enjoyed that session and got a lot out of it. Again, if you've got questions around wanting to learn about development, have a look at this, the mentoring that Bob does, Bob and Hillary as well. If you like today's session, please visit and subscribe to our YouTube channel, The Business of Property, and make sure you hit the like button so you get told of when new episodes go up. Can't wait to see you tomorrow at the Go Coast. Take care. Awesome. Can't see who it is. Thanks, Greg. Until next time, take care and see you again. Bye-bye.